Hello, listeners. Hi, my name is Madhavi, and I'm so happy to have you on UppTalk. You have come to the right place if you want to learn about IT and do really cool things with your hands. We are not just another IT company when I say UppTalk. Think of us as your learning partner dedicated to helping you reach your full potential. We have top notch hands on courses to help you build your business, whether you're new to technology or want to move up in your current job. Let's look around this as our first step towards learning.
Let's quickly understand the theory of privileged session manager. What happened to my monitors? Give me 1 minute. We are going to deploy the privileged session manager and then we will come back to all those topics. All right. Apologies. I'm just having issues with my monitor. It looks like it is 6 now. All right. Privileged session manager. Let's talk about the use case for privileged session manager. Why the privileged session manager is required. On the first page, let's say we have a server here, taking example of Windows Server. We have an account here called administrator XYZ. This account is very sensitive account, very powerful account. If we do not have any solution to manage these secured account, usually your individual users that require to access these accounts will be simply initiating RDP client in order to connect this particular system. And they will be having a direct access to the password, simply initiating the RDP connection client to connect to the server using this particular account. In this process, you're not going to have control over user sessions because they will be masking their identity. And let's say this P1 to this person. One initiates the connection to target system using this account username and password. The first thing password is exposed. Password is exposed. Again, you do not have control on the user session. You do not have any audit rates. No one knows what the user is doing inside the server, even if they are using the most sensitive credentials that they are using to log in. No accountability is there. No accountability is there. To prevent all of this from happening, to prevent the password exposure, direct exposure of the passwords to individual user, and to generate a detailed audit, trails and logs to make sure all the evidence are there. To perform detailed auditing, the privileged session manager is required. Let's see how the privileged session manager actually works. In this case, we'll onboard the account in our PV way. The account gets onboarded on the Vault. Just wanted to clarify that. But just for sake of understanding, let's say we onboarded the account on the PVWA with the username and the password. And since the password was exposed, as soon as we onboarded the account, we changed the password. We triggered a password change through CPM. Now the new password is XYZ1. The new password is now XYZ1. Now, if the password is changed and we are not exposing the password to end user, we are not sending the password to end user. P1 does not know the password now. Direct connections are restricted. They wouldn't be able to initiate an RDP client and provide the username and password to connect to the system because they do not know the password. Direct connection is now limited. There is no direct connections being made to the target systems. In this case, if the P1 has a genuine requirement to use this account to connect to the systems, we will ask them to log into CyberArk, authenticate themselves, and then use this account. P1 will have to log into CyberArk, authenticate themselves, and then they will be able to pick up this account. Click on this account and there will be a connect button there. Once the PSM is deployed, there is going to be a connect button. This connect button, when they click on this, they'll have to provide an IP address. Let's say the user provided the IP address of this particular server. A connection, an RDP file will be generated for you. It will be automatically downloaded just like it happens in your AWS environment. RDP file will be generated and the connection to the target server will be established, but it wouldn't go directly to the target server. There is going to be a jump server sitting in between the user's local machine. Since the PMA is opened in your local machine in your laptop browser, open in your browser. Between the user's local machine and the target server, there's going to be a jump server, and this is what we call Privileged Session Manager. Privileged Session Manager. Privileged Session Manager is basically a jump server sitting between user's local machine and the target system. Step 1. The connection to the PSM server will be established. As soon as the user provides the IP address and the RDP file gets generated, the user clicks on the connect button on the RDP file, connection to the PSM server will be established. This is step 1, but to establish the connection to the PSM server, there has to be a username and password that can be used to connect to the PSM server, and it is not administrator and XXYZ because this account had access to this server. The accounts that you onboard in Cyber are not going to have access to PSM server. They are going to have access to their respective target systems. How does the connection to the PSM server get established here? Using a service account called PSM Connect. Using a service account called PSM Connect. Just like we have a PVA app user and PVA gateway user created on the Vault, right? We have an internal user created locally on the PSM server during PSM installation. Responsible to initiate connection to the PSM server. Responsible to initiate connection to the PSM server in each end user session. The PSM Connect is going to do that. As soon as the user clicks on the connect button, step 1 is PSM Connect establishes the connection to the PSM server. Step 2 now, in case of Windows servers, in case of Windows systems. Windows systems are an exception here. PSM Connect is going to once the systems are connected. Once the user is connected to the PSM server, the user wouldn't actually be able to see the PSM server. But on the back end, Once the connection to the PSM server is established, the RDP client will be initiated. If I click on RDP client here, remote desktop connection, if I do a right click here, it's going to give me an option to run as administrator. That means I'm running this client as a different user. On the PSM server for Windows connections, the remote desktop client is going to be initiated as run as the PSM Connect. The client will be initiated, and as soon as the client is initiated, there will be another user, the PSSM app user. We are going to talk about it. The IP address, username, and password. All of the details will be retrieved from the vault, and the connection to the respective target system will be established. Connection to the respective target system will be established. This is for Windows servers. For any other connection client, let's say because PS is going to have the ability to connect to a lot of non-RDP client as well. Non-RDP client as in Oracle SQL Server, SQL Network clients, any target systems that CyberArk has the default platforms as the process is defined. CyberArk will be able to establish connection to all these devices and applications as well. For these connections, the client that will be used to establish the connection to the respective system will be installed locally on the PSM server. Just like we have the remote desktop connection client installed here in my machine. On the PSM server, an Oracle client will be installed to connect to SQL Server. The SQL Server Management Studio will be installed. All those clients will be locally installed on the PSM server. And for other clients other than RDP, step 2 is going to be shadow user or duplicate user called shadow user will be created. The shadow user is responsible to initiate connection to. The shadow user is going to be responsible to initiate connection time for P1. We are going to have a different shadow user for P2. We are going to have a different shadow user. Even shadow user initiates the connection client. Let's say the Oracle client is there. The connection client will be initiated by again run as the P1 shadow user. Once the connection client is initiated, the password username, password, IP address will automatically be entered. The shadow user's only responsibility is that it needs to initiate the connection plan. And not in case of Windows, only in case of non-RDP clients. Why do we have the shadow user to initiate the connection client? Why can't PM connect to that? To achieve isolation in the process. Let's take an example of any database device. Let's say any other client, let's say Oracle client code, client Oracle code. To connect to Oracle client, a shadow user will be initiated. The Oracle client application IP address, username, and password will automatically enter during the PSM session, and connection to the Oracle system will be initiated. This is not client Oracle database instance. Once the connection is established, there is going to be another user that will be responsible for recording. But let's talk about the shadow user a bit more. Why do we have shadow user here in this place? Just to achieve the isolation. How does the isolation work? Let's say there is another user called P2. P2 tries to log into the P way and initiate the connection here. A connection will be initiated for P2 the same way. But in this case, the connection client is going to be initiated by a different shadow user, a different individual identity P2 shadow user. And since the connection client is going to be initiated by a different entity, the cached credentials. Sometimes what happens when you log into a system, the system has the tendency to cache credentials. Cache means save credentials to make the process more faster. You might have noticed it with Chrome. Cached credentials, sometimes registry settings in case of web browsers, history. All these information will be same if we initiate the connection using the PSM Connect client. Using the PSM Connect user, if we initiate the connection client, the information, the history registry settings credentials, all of the information is going to be same for every user. But in this case, since we are initiating the connection with two different individual entities, the connection client is being initiated by two different individual entities. The connection will be happening using the same account. But since the client was initiated by two different users, the settings, the credentials, the cache that was cached, history, everything is going to be different. This is what we call isolation between these two user sessions. The information that they have saved inside the connection client that should not be visible to any other user. Any cache credential or any information or any older sessions that they're working on, that should not be visible to any other user. This is what we mean by isolation. The isolation is not going to be the way it is going to be for the other connection client. For Windows Shadow users will not be created. Only the PSM Connect is going to initiate those connections. And for Windows, the Shadow users will not be created actually. Windows, there is an exception. They have limitation because they mentioned in a document that if we create shadow users for Windows, the copy paste functionality will go away. They do not do that for Windows. Credentials will be managed locally in the not exactly rotated this. This is going to be a static password. But user is going to be very weak. Password change are not usually done on the shadow users. And by default, each shadow users is going to be created only for 30 days. What happens here is when the P1 logs into a system, the shadow user will be initiating the connection client. And let's say P1 logs off after 1 hour or P2 logs in. P1 shadow user will not be used in the connection P2 shadow user. P2 for P2 will be a different user and all the sessions will be separate and new sessions will be created for P2. But after some time, if even logs back in again, the same shadow user will be used for P1 that was created earlier and P1 session will be resumed. Within the target server, the sessions will not be for Windows. At least you cannot have two users. At least if you're talking from the standpoint of file structures, those are going to be visible in each other's sessions. All we are trying to achieve here is that the information that some clients or some browsers might have noticed. When you log into a browser, some histories will be there and some cached credentials are going to be there. Those kinds of informations are more sensitive that we do not want to overlap to individual users. The folder structure is something that is where you do not have the control. Unless you create two different users to connect to the server, the folder structures are going to be same. PSM admin connect another user. Once the sessions are established, the PSM admin connect user is going to be a local administrator. Again, it's an internal user created on the PSM server. A lot of internal users here created locally. Internal users created locally on the PSM server during the PSM installation. This is going to be a local administrator account. Privileges are going to be local admin. This is going to have local administrator capabilities, and it will start the recording of the sessions every time the session is established. There are two more internal users involved in this process. The first is PSM app user, just like we had the PVUL app user and PVU gateway user. We have PSM app user and PSM gateway user. And just like the PVView app user used to retrieve the platform and save details, this PSM app user is going to retrieve the same set of details for the privileged session manager. PSM app user is basically internal user. This time the user is created on the vault. Internal user created on the vault responsible to retrieve the platform. And save details. At platforms, PSM needs to know the platform details because if the account belongs to Windows platform, it needs to initiate RDP client. If the account belongs to Linux platform or Linux devices, the PuTTY client or SSH client needs to be initiated. This is where PSM needs to understand the processes before it establishes the connection. And those platforms and save details will be retrieved by the PSM app user from the vault, and PSM is going to get all those details through this user. Another user that is involved in the process. These internal users are very important from interview and certification perspective. PSM gateway user is responsible to retrieve the credentials. Privileged credentials in order to establish connections. A PSM is going to have the record of all the privileged credentials. It's going to retrieve all the details from the vault. To log into the vault, it's going to use the PSM gateway user and retrieves all the credentials. These two users will be created on the vault, and these two users will be locally created on the PSM server. These are the processes called back-end session workflow. The user is not going to be able to see all these processes. All the users see is that when it clicks on the connect button, the connection to the system is getting established, but on the back end, all these processes are getting triggered. Privileged Session Manager. Three functions: isolated, isolation, monitoring, and recording. There are some prerequisites that need to be ensured before you actually deploy the Privileged Session Manager. You have to install the remote desktop service on the Privileged Session Manager server. It has to be a Windows server. All servers have to be a Windows server. The remote desktop services need to be installed, and along with the remote desktop services, a lot of features will come along. I have written some examples of the features. But all these features we can simply install from the server manager and roles and feature installation, just like we did the Active Directory installation. But to avoid the manual work, Cyberpunk has prepared a PowerShell script for installing all these roles and features. We'll be using that just like we used in PVOA. We'll be using PowerShell scripts to install all the required roles and features. Second, the client access license should be there properly. Client access license is basically every time you initiate a remote desktop connection to a server remotely from your Windows Server operating system, it costs a license. It's going to cost a license. By default, Microsoft gives you 120 days of evaluation license, but you do not really use evaluation license in production. You'll have to make sure that you are getting the client access license properly configured in your PSM server before you start the deployment. You'll have to calculate the license requirement. However, you'll have to calculate the number of users that are going to log in and the frequency level of their connections. And based on that, you need to make a decision on how much license you should be procuring from Microsoft, and you can communicate your requirement to the respective procurement team. Third, server capacity needs to be planned. Server capacity in terms of disk space. When you make a connection to the target systems through PSM through CyberArk, the recordings will ultimately be transferred to the vault. They will be stored on the vault. But as long as the sessions are ongoing, the recordings will be stored locally on the PSM server. As long as the sessions are active, the recordings will be stored locally on the PSM server. And that is where your PSM server should have enough capacity to store all those recordings. Because let's say if 50 and 60 concurrent sessions are being made, your PSM server should have enough capacity to store all those recordings. And that is why you need to plan the space on your PSM server. The sizing requirement should be carefully considered. I've added a link here that might be helpful for you to understand the process of calculation of sizing in the PSM server. Based on the number of users, based on the frequency level, based on the accounts that you have onboarded inside CyberArk, you calculate the space requirement for your privileged session manager server. Once all of that is properly configured, you can go ahead and deploy the privileged session manager. Basically, when your one PSM is not able to handle all those traffic, in that case, you can load balance multiple PSMs. Some saves are going to be created on the vault. Some saves are going to be created on the vault. And again, these saves are not something that you interact with as an administrator. These saves will be managed by the vault. The configuration files are going to be stored on these saves, which you do not modify directly. Saves is something that I'll leave you to go through this detail. The internal users, however, they are very important. And the session workflow is very, very important. The internal users and session workflow, the one that we have discussed, I've tried to map all of these processes on the sheet as well. This is where you can get some reference. I'll just go through this. But that's all the theory that I have on the Privileged Session Manager. Please do like, share, and subscribe to our channel. For more information, contact us sales@therightuptalk.com.